Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Diane Roussin, the recently announced board chair of the Winnipeg Foundation. A member of Skownan First Nation in Manitoba, Roussin has dedicated decades of service to Winnipeg's inner city. Her appointment as board chair of the Winnipeg Foundation is historic and marks the first time an Indigenous leader has served in the role during the Foundation's 105-year history. Its endowment fund is estimated at more than $2 billion. Roussin is also the project director of the Winnipeg Boldness Project, which works to create better outcomes for children and families in Winnipeg's Point Douglas neighborhood. Diane, thanks so much for being with us on the show this week.
Well, thanks for the invite. I always appreciate being asked to come and speak about the things I do.
Well, pleasure to have you. And we're going to start with the recent announcement that you were taking on the role of the board chair of the Winnipeg Foundation. Maybe for starters, though, a little for those unfamiliar with it about the Winnipeg Foundation and the work that it does.
Well, the Winnipeg Foundation is a philanthropic organization, so it means that it is a place where a lot of people can make donations, and then what we do with those donations is we grant them out into the area of Winnipeg in all kinds of facets. If you go to the Winnipeg Foundation website, you can see how many places have received funding from the foundation, so it's pretty vast. It does happen to be the biggest community foundation in Canada, and it happens to be the oldest community foundation in Canada.
How did you come to be board chair?
Oh, well, it's been a bit of a road. I've had a pretty long history with the Winnipeg Foundation, have always worked in the inner city of Winnipeg, and have always worked in the not-for-profit sector, so have always received funding from the Winnipeg Foundation. And yeah, an opportunity came along that I was asked if I wanted to participate on the board of directors at the governance level, and I immediately said yes. And so I've been on the board for a little while now, and yeah, every year, every second year I'll say, the Winnipeg Foundation does elect a chair to the board, and the opportunity came up, so I threw my hat in the ring, and the board did happen to select me, so here I am. I'm now the chair for 2 years.
Nice stuff, and as mentioned in the intro, a historic move, as you're the first Indigenous person to hold the role as board chair. What does that mean to you?
It's very important. The Winnipeg Foundation is a very humble place. They're not really a place to brag very much. They just want to put their heads down and get the really good work done. But for this one, I asked them if they would do just a little bit of extra, being that it is an Indigenous person for the first time in the role. I just think about this place in Winnipeg, how much leadership we have, and the history of this place, that we just take up the space and we let the world know that Indigenous people are in these leadership roles.
In 2021, Sky Bridges, the former Chief Operating Officer here at APTN, became the President and CEO of the Winnipeg Foundation, a role he still has. Do you see some significance to Indigenous people heading up the board and day-to-day operations as well at the Winnipeg Foundation? Absolutely.
Sky is a great CEO. We're very lucky to have him. And so sorry, APTN, that we took him from you, but he's been doing an amazing job. And yeah, I think it's significant that it's another Indigenous person who's the first Indigenous CEO of the Winnipeg Foundation. And it's possible that he's the first CEO of a community foundation across Canada. So the fact that there's two Indigenous people sort of leading and at the helm of the Winnipeg Foundation, I think it matters. I once heard a saying, which I happen to agree with, that said, when you change the people that are in the conversation changes. And so I think it's just super important to have Indigenous people occupying all kinds of leadership roles in Winnipeg.
Like you mentioned, you've benefited from the foundation over the years and been on the board for a while. Did this seem like a possible thing to have two Indigenous people at the top positions 5-10 years ago?
Again, and this has no reflection on the Winnipeg Foundation itself, but the former CEO had been in place for over 22 years. And so you just sometimes think, oh, people won't retire, but he did retire and the search was on. And I do think it's a big role. And I do think like a lot of people would be interested in that role. So the fact that we hired an Indigenous person into that role, I can't say that I saw that coming, but was super impressed and just over the moon when it was announced that it was Sky.
In 2024, the Winnipeg Foundation provided more than $91 million to support more than 1,100 organizations. What type of good have you seen the foundation do over the years?
Well, the foundation has a saying, and it does say that it's a 360-degree funder. So that means that they fund almost everything. So, from arts and culture to community to inner city. I just think everyone has received some kind of funding from the Winnipeg Foundation. So it has a really broad reach. Maybe a little bit lesser known fact about the Winnipeg Foundation is that it is a place for all the other community foundations in Manitoba. Manitoba happens to have the most community foundations in all the provinces across the country, and the Winnipeg Foundation is a big backbone support to all of those community organizations. And so through those philanthropic groups, the reach in Manitoba is vast.
Can you talk about how organizations that you've worked with have benefited from the foundation in the past?
Well, there's all kinds of funding out there. Not enough, I will say, but there's different kinds of funding. And so the Winnipeg Foundation is what we call, philanthropic dollars, which is different than government dollars or different than those kinds of grants. And so quite often the philanthropic dollar tends to be the most flexible. And it tends to be a dollar that can be used to de-risk certain situations so that other funders can come in and have more surety in what it is they're funding. And it's usually a catalytic dollar, which means it's the first dollar in often, and it just opens the doorway for other funders to come in when they know that there is a place like the Winnipeg Foundation who has done its homework, and it just gives that kind of security to other funders.
What are you most excited about for in this role?
Well, the Winnipeg Foundation has been changing over the years. I mean, it's been around for a very long time. And every year, I feel like it just changes again in such a big way. And so we have all kinds of initiatives. And so the granting dollars just keep expanding and expanding, moving into this whole area of community impact and community investment, or impact investing, I should say. So really excited about what that's gonna look like. And yeah, again, just really focusing in on certain pillars in the city, and lots of work has happened in the inner city of Winnipeg, particularly around housing and homelessness. And again, there's just so many different grantees that are all doing really hard work. But it's the ability to go a little bit deeper into some of the really hard pressing issues and areas that Winnipeg is experiencing right now.
Nice. Well, we wish you all the best in the new role. We're going to talk more about the inner city, I guess, and your work with the Boldness Project. We just have to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Diane Roussin, the board chair of the Winnipeg Foundation and the project director of the Boldness Project. Diane, can you tell us a bit about what exactly the Boldness Project is?
Well, we are the longest serving Indigenous social innovation lab in Canada. We have been around for over 12 years, and we're situated in the north end of Winnipeg. And by lab, I mean that we are a place that is trying to figure out some of the really challenging systems issues that Indigenous people are facing. Things like child welfare, things like justice, the way that we are overrepresented in the unemployment numbers or the lack of education. Those are big systems challenges. And so the Winnipeg Boldness Project is trying to figure out how do we deal with those big challenges in a way that leads to just way better health and wellness for children and families, and particularly Indigenous children and families.
Right. How did the idea come about for the project?
Well, I will say that the language of the Social Innovation Lab did come along about 12 years ago, but it really is built on the wisdom and the foundation of Indigenous leaders in the North End that has been around for generations. And so I particularly give a lot of credence to matriarchs. That's who I learned from, and that's who I was always working with in the North End. It is a lot of their wisdom that led to what led to the Winnipeg Boldness Project. It is a social R&D shop, so research and development, and which is very different than program delivery. And so a lot of the organizations that I have worked with in the past in the inner city have been about delivering really good programs to children and families, and we really need that. And we need a lot of social research and development to try on new things, to try on different solutions. And I will say the one thing that is very particular about the Winnipeg Boldness Project is that it's a place where we actually talk to families and children that are, receiving those programs and that are being affected by those systems. Go to them directly, ask them what they think the problem is, ask them what they think the solution is, and from there we build prototypes. And so these are just different ways that we might change these systems so that they better serve families and children.
Nice. Most people outside of Winnipeg or even within Winnipeg would think of the North End as a rough place for sure. Who are the people that you do work with?
Well, so there's a lot of ways to talk about the North End, and it's not just one thing or one or the other, and so it's and absolutely there are a lot of challenges in the North End. We get to work with a lot of families that have obviously a lot of strengths, and as we're looking to build healthier communities and better communities, it's the strengths of the families that we have to really draw upon to figure out what those solutions are. So we don't, the weaknesses are there and we don't ignore them, but that's not the place that we start the community building from. We really look to the strengths of families, and our families are strong. They've had to persevere. They have to get through so many different challenges. And I will say the biggest motivator for all of us, but for sure families in the North End, is children. People will move mountains for their kids. And so that's what we get to work with, and that's the motivation, that's the inspiration. I will say our families really operate with a lot of grace and a lot of tenacity and just a lot of beautiful wisdom that our families have.
Are there misconceptions, do you think, about the North End and the people there?
Well, I think, I don't know if people think that even, there are people doing exhibiting bad behaviors or engaging in bad behaviors. That doesn't always make them bad people, and so quite often we just want the bad behaviors to stop, and a lot of those bad behaviors are because of these systems things that are in place. And so we're trying to change the systems so that people can engage in better behaviors, because quite often those individuals are like your auntie or your uncle or your grandpa or your dad or your brother. So it's not that it's all full of bad people. It's really full of a lot of strong people who just want to do better and are just looking for ways to break through those systems so they can do better.
Have the challenges that are faced by many in the North End changed over the years that the Boldness Project has been around?
Well, yeah, I think there's some situations like poverty that just has been there for generations, and it will continue to be there for generations. I think that some of the issues do change over time or become a little bit more predominant. I think the pandemic did certainly change a lot of things for our families. We're seeing a lot more things around mental health, having to do with that isolation, having to do with that just fear of the fear that the pandemic did put, I think, in all of us. Certainly the homelessness issues, the addiction issues are really prevalent, and so those are the really difficult, challenging situations that we're really trying to think about and trying to figure out how we might create solutions for those.
And so what are you hearing from the people on ways to create solutions to address these issues? Again,
if you ask our families, they have a lot of ideas about what can be different. The problem is that they don't often get asked. So there's no end to the solutions, there's no end to the insights, to the experiences that our families have. They're just not often involved in the solution finding. And so that's, again, what the Boldness Project is trying to do, is really center those voices, really center Indigenous wisdom and how it is that we're going to start designing different systems that better serve the needs of not only Indigenous people, but all Manitobans and all Winnipeggers.
Like you said, the pandemic's done a lot of things to a lot of people. Have you noticed or have families, children, are things getting better in the years that the Boldness Project's been around, or is the system still finding its ways to system?
Well, there's still a lot of, systems can be very intractable, so there's still a lot of work to do. I think coming out of the pandemic, we're starting to get back to the idea of gathering again. I think we did see a lot of the non-gathering, and so people feeling isolated, feeling like they're in this alone. And when you're facing really tough situations, sometimes just being able to be together is the first step. And that's where we get together, we figure out that we're not in this alone, we all have ideas, and then we start working together to figure out what those solutions might be. And yeah, the pandemic just really separated and isolated us quite a bit. And so we're starting to see people coming around now to more fulsome gatherings. You're starting to see a little bit more celebration. Like, celebration is important as well. And so we're starting to see more of the community barbecues and just the getting together in big groups is starting to happen again.
What would you say are some of the success stories that you've seen over the years?
Well, again, when we're able to be a place for folks to come together, the coalitioning and the collaborating has been super successful for us. Families feel like they're being heard, they're being listened to, they feel like their ideas are being implemented. They can see actual situations where their ideas have been implemented and led to different solutions. Mostly people talk about the approach we use, which is really, relational, like centering of the Indigenous wisdom, which is about centering, holistic approaches, centering Indigenous teachings, centering relationality, centering trust. People really value those approaches, and so sometimes the solution is really good, but the solution can almost be the secondary part of it. It's the approach, and it's how people feel and how people see what they're talking about be implemented.
Yeah, I guess that would be the part, people are bringing you these great solutions. When you take it back to those running the systems, what's the reception there usually?
Again, I have to believe that people, by and large, wake up wanting to do better, and people aren't, I don't think, waking up trying to block families or trying to not let families be healthy. So I think everybody does want to try to change the systems, but often they just don't know how. And so that's a part of what the Boldness Project does, is we try to show how might you change your system, or how might we, by directly talking to families that are in those systems. So families that, say, are on social assistance, families that are in social housing, families that have been in the justice system, they know what doesn't work. And so if we can just listen to what they're saying, I think we can make some really good changes. And I think the people that work in those systems are very eager to learn about what might they do in their system. I think it's when if you feel like you're the only one, it feels overwhelming and intractable. So the idea of developing relationships with one another, and that we go at this as a collective, I think is where we see a lot of hope.
Right. What are your hopes for the Boldness Project?
Again, we want to see a lot of systems challenges. We want to see a lot of systems changes. And when we see those systems change, and they change in the way that families are asking them to change, I think we're going to see things like less people getting incarcerated. We're going to see less children in the care of CFS. We're going to see more graduation rates. We're going to see more employment, more people starting businesses, and so on and so forth. So when people are able to participate in society and in the economy based on their strengths, I think we all flourish and we all thrive.
Yes, excellent goals for us all to want to strive for. Diane, more to talk about here. We're just going to step aside for one last quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Diane Roussin, the project director of the Boldness Project, and recently announced board chair of the Winnipeg Foundation. Two things that we've been talking about here, but Diane, you've dedicated a pretty good portion of your life to trying to uplift others. What would you credit with leading you down this path?
You know, I say quite often now that I am very privileged to have been raised by my family in an era of truth and reconciliation, in an era of residential schools and colonization. So many Indigenous families have been taken apart, and some of us have been stolen. You know, I just, again, very fortunate to have been raised by my parents, raised in my family. I've always known who I am. I've always known where I come from. I'm Anishinaabe, and you know, from Skowhegan First Nation. I know where the land is, and so not all of us can say that. And being raised up by parents who spoke Anishinaabe my whole life in the household, you know, with the values and the teachings of indigeneity, that's my strength, and that's what's really carried me through in life, and that's the thing that continues to carry me through in life. I've had the privilege of working in the North End, working with matriarchs, so working with organizations that are Indigenous-led, boards of directors. You know, programming has come from an Indigenous perspective and serving Indigenous families. So I've just been so very lucky to be surrounded by all the strength and beauty of Indigenous people my whole life.
I guess, you know, some of the work, though, on the flip side of that strength and beauty is working with vulnerable people and people going through hard times. Does it take a lot to keep moving forward with that work?
Again, I think our families are very direct about what it is they're looking for and what it is they need, and they're very quick to tell you what doesn't work. So if you're open to that kind of direction and feedback, the work can be fairly straightforward in terms of what you need to do. I think we see a lot of the same patterns. I think a lot of our you know, anywhere from our young people to our seniors, all across the spectrum, I think people are asking for more access to culture, more access to their identity, and more opportunities to express their identity or to learn about their identity. You know, our families just keep telling us that over and over and over again. And so there's a lot of work to do there. So there's no shortage of the amount of work to do. And I feel very fortunate that I get to work in spaces where we're trying to bring that to families.
Yeah. You know, as somebody who does a lot of volunteering as well, where do you see major gaps where people are needed?
Well, I think, you know, directly working with families and children has always been the most motivating for me. It's been the best times of my career, times of my work. But at some point, I've come to realize that we do need those Indigenous voices at all levels and in all areas. And so while most of my career has been focused specifically working within Indigenous organization and within the Indigenous community, more recently I've had to step out of that and work in more non-Indigenous spaces. And so I do volunteer quite a bit. I sit on quite a few boards of directors across Winnipeg and across the country. And a lot of those boards are not Indigenous led. And so often I will find myself the only Indigenous person at that boardroom table. Sometimes I will be the only person who can bring that particular perspective. And so I will do that always, and I do that in a very strong way. But a big part of that work for me has been about trying to get other people to the table, making sure that there's more Indigenous voices at the table, especially in Winnipeg when we are, you know, at least 20% of the population. I feel like that kind of percentage needs to be reflected in all the governance spaces, in all the places in Winnipeg.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of those spaces, you know, a lot of your work is behind the scenes. Have you ever considered entering public life or running for office?
I get asked that quite a bit. I've never seriously taken on that role. I absolutely appreciate and hold up our politicians, and again, particularly here in Winnipeg, we have a lot of politicians to be proud of, and particularly Indigenous politicians, so all the power to them. I've never felt that I could, you know, take those roles on. I just feel like my strength is working in community. But we do need those politicians because, you know, they are in those decision-making places. And so I would rather work with them from the community side and work together to get the things done in our community.
Not a lot of Indigenous representation at City Council. Election coming up here in a couple months.
Yes.
Well, Diane, you do such great work. We appreciate it all and appreciate you coming on the show this week.
Well, Kachimi Gretch, thank you for having me.
And that is all the time we have for this week's show. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. We will see you back here in 7 days.